Thank you, Nia. And also on my end to all of you, it is truly an honor and pleasure to welcome you here at what I think is a fantastic place, hidden between highly exclusive and exorbitantly expensive art galleries and fashion houses of Tribeca, a small stronghold, I believe, of emancipatory art and democratic debate. We are very humbled that you chose to brave the heat and join us to discuss housing precarity, mass incarceration, and activist art. My name is Jeroen Stevens. I'm the curator of this exhibition, for which I had the privilege of working together with 7 amazing artists, some of whom I'm very happy that they are also here. I first and foremost want to thank all of them for the enormous amount of energy that they put into this, their trust to embark on this adventure together with this half stranger, architect, photographer, whatever, white guy from Belgium. Thank you also to Apexar, Stephen, Ash, Ryan, Mia, Lisa. You do incredibly big work with an incredibly tiny team. A shout out also to the Belgian Consul General in New York, Philip van den Boke and Eva de Portre and colleagues for joining forces on this, and my sincere gratitude to all the countless people who have contributed to this research project over the past few years. This public debate is indeed one of numerous events wherewith we are really aiming to occupy this space, use it, abuse it perhaps from time to time as a platform, as a stage to bring discussions and debates of which we feel that they are very often pushed away rather to the margins of this city, conveniently tucked away in old industrial warehouses out in the old docks in the outskirts of the Bronx, or conveniently isolated, confined, sequestered on Randall's Island, Wards Island, Rikers Island, and eventually Hart Island. This city houses more millionaires than any other city across the planet. Yet at the very same time, this city houses a population where half of the city's adult black men are trapped in a highly unjust criminal justice industry, in jail, in prison, on probation, or on parole. In parallel, about 100,000 New Yorkers sleep in homeless shelters in this city on an average night. In Belgium, we would call that the city. Half of the people dismissed from New York state prisons are directly funneled into homeless shelters. Simultaneously, 1 out of 6 individuals trapped in prisons were homeless before they were incarcerated. So the aim of this show, and that will also be the central topic of this panel debate this evening, is really that revolving door between these highly dehumanizing institutions, where it's the very same dehumanized and criminalized population that seems to be constantly pushed back and forth between different institutional settings, housed in highly precarious situations and environments, but environments that are by design dysfunctional, environments that are designed to seem to try to dehumanize, traumatize, and degenerate human beings in an irrevocable ways. New York's prison and shelter system makes up one of the most sophisticated racial segregation doctrines in the world. That is the premise of this show. We invited speakers for this evening who are not involved as contributing artists to this show, but have tremendous experience on their own behalf to speak on the work and challenges presented and discussed here through art and activism, and as guests in our temporary occupation of this place. And please allow me to welcome them very briefly. I must admit, quite disrespectfully, because I have to summarize a lot of great life achievements into a mere few lines of introduction for each of them. We're very happy to have with us as one of the speakers Melissa Benson from Broadway Housing. Melissa serves as an advisor to nonprofit organizations driving social change. From 2019 to 21, she worked with the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund to create an immigration bond fund and pass bail reform legislation in New York State. She's currently advising Broadway Housing Communities, where she previously served as Director of Development and Communications from 2012 to 2018. We also are very happy to have Darren Mack from Freedom Agenda and the Urban Justice Center. Darren Mack was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. During 20 years of incarceration, Darren became an avid reader interested in issues related to race, class, and gender. After his release, he actively engaged in working to dismantle new Jim Crow practices. He is the co-founder and co-director of Freedom Agenda. And then last but not least, we have Isaac Scott with us from the Confined Arts. Isaac Scott is an awarded multidisciplinary visual artist, journalist, and human rights activist. As an experienced community organizer, he was also a fellow at the Columbia Law School and founder of the Confined Arts at the Center of Justice at Columbia University, where he spearheads justice reform through the transformative power of the arts. So if you would please join me here on the stage, and if you would join me in welcoming our speakers of this evening. So to kick off this conversation, we have a few questions prepared for you, but as I mentioned to you before this, please do absolutely feel free to take those in any direction you want, but do try to limit your talk to a few minutes, since we do not want to infringe on the time reserved for our reception afterwards. And we also want to reserve some time for dialogue amongst you and the audience, both in the room and online, of course. But I want to open up this conversation by inviting each of you to briefly present yourself and your work, the organization or organizations you somehow represent, and your own struggle for social justice in New York City and beyond. And Melissa, if that's okay for you, we could maybe start with you.
Does that work? Yes. Well, the first thing I have to do is confess that I shouldn't be here at all. I'm here really representing, and not all that well, Ellen Baxter, who founded Broadway Housing Communities and led it for over 40 years. She stepped down last year, and she would be here. She wanted to be here, but she couldn't. So I know Ellen well, and I know her work well, and I believe in it, and I'm happy to speak to it a bit. But I will tell you that, you know, Yaron described me as someone who advises social justice organizations. When I helped Ellen and Broadway Housing Communities get to a certain place, and they seemed very good, and I decided to go back to Brooklyn, where I live, and work from there. And I went from Broadway Housing Communities that really Ellen Baxter created the model of supportive housing in New York City. In New York City, it did not exist before Ellen. The funding, the everything model, the service model, the funding model, everything. And when family homelessness became a huge crisis, she adapted the model that she had developed for single adults to serve homeless families. So she's been a visionary and a path breaker for all these years. And I, when I walked away from Broadway Housing Communities, not really walked away, I continued to help them, but back to Brooklyn, the organization I worked with there was the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund. And it's interesting that those two issues, housing, you know, homelessness, the homeless crisis, and the criminal legal system, I did not plan to work with both, but those worlds clearly collide. That's why we're here tonight. Um, so that's the end of my story about who I am. But I am thrilled to be able to speak to the intersection of those two kind of institutionalized um, systems of inequality and oppression.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me today, and thank you for everybody attending this evening. As was mentioned, my name is Darren Mack. I'm co-director at Freedom Agenda, which is a grassroots, member-led organization dedicated to organizing people and communities directly impacted by incarceration in order to achieve decarceration and system transformation. So at Freedom Agenda, we have a little broader what it means to be directly impacted. Not only do we consider people who actually experience incarceration themselves as directly impacted, but also the family members, of those who experience incarceration as well. Because if you incarcerate a mother, the children impacted by her incarceration, and likewise in other family relationships. So as far as my work related to social justice, Freedom Agenda, along with over 180 organizational partners throughout New York City, is leading the campaign to close what I call the last penal colony in the United States, Rikers Island. Like people probably heard of Alcatraz decades ago, which closed. McNeil Island was a penal colony in the U.S. that closed like in the early 2000s, leaving Rikers Island to be the last penal colony. And been engaged in this fight, advocacy, and organizing around this issue. Thanks to the coalition, organizational partners, and allies in 2019, we pushed the city to pass legislation to close Rikers by August 31st, 2027. Um, since then, there's been sort of regards to like the financial. It's a financial justice issue as well because currently it costs over $555,000 to keep one person on Rikers Island for a year. That's $500,000 that taxpayer money is spending to incarcerate one person for a year. So this is a social justice issue for us as well because there's been estimates that's been made that when Rikers is closed, the city is going to save over $2 billion a year. That's what it be. Currently, the operating budget of the Department of Corrections is about $2.6, $2.7 billion. But once we close the jail complex on Rikers Island, we'll be saving $2 billion that we also going to have to fight for to get redistributed back into the communities that's been impacted by mass incarceration in our city. And lastly, it's also is a racial justice issue, it's a social justice issue, it's a financial economic justice issue, and it's also an environmental justice issue. Because the vision for when Rikers is closed is what we call another campaign called Renewable Rikers. So all across the city, there's these thing called peaker plants. Like a day like this, the peaker plants is probably active because they operate like batteries. When the city utilizes a certain amount of energy, these plants kick in so the city won't black out. But the problem is that they exhume toxicities into the atmosphere, and they're mostly in black and brown communities throughout our city. And the communities have been fighting to get these peaker plants removed. So the vision for Renewable Rikers, criminal justice, environmental justice, and climate justice folks came together, formed the Renewable Rikers Coalition that got legislation passed in 2021 to create green, sustainable energy on Rikers Island to power the city and remove these peaker plants. And the community should decide, and that's another fight, the community should decide what that space is going to be utilized for the community. So I'll end it there for there, but Renewable Rikers is the vision. That's the fight we're still engaged in. We got some legislation passed around that, where every 6 months the city has to evaluate what land and what facilities is not being utilized by the Department of Corrections. And if that determination is made, then that land or facility will be transferred from DOC to the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. So far, over 40 acres of Rikers Island was transferred. One of the facilities was transferred. That was a previous administration. This current administration, it's been a lot of challenges. We could probably talk about that. Mayoral administration, city council in line, the speaker in line, Black Latino caucus in line, progressive caucus, they all align. Borough president, they all align. The problem is Mayor Eric Adams. That's the only challenge that we've been having. So I'll end it right there, and hopefully there might be some questions I could like elaborate more about that and the vision for the future.
I feel like I just want to ask Darren questions now. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Isaac Scott. I'm a multidisciplinary visual artist. We need our protection. Make sure we safe. I'm a multidisciplinary visual artist. I'm here on behalf of, I would say, I'll list the organizations I'm a part of, but of note, I'm the CEO of Isaac's Quarterly, which is a design and consulting company that I started when I came home in 2014. I came home 2013 and I started it in 2014. The most notable thing we've done is we've created a program called the Confined Arts. This started as a series of exhibitions, pop-up exhibitions from Harlem to Brooklyn, all over the city, where we featured the work of currently and formerly incarcerated artists. Not only that, we highlighted the impact, the directly impacted family members of those people who are incarcerated and their loved ones who are actually carrying through and riding out the bid with them. So we brought more attention around the issues of incarceration, not just the people who are impacted inside, but how there was an ecosystem around those who are incarcerated. I was able to develop this program during my time and studies at Columbia University, and we've grown it from this series of exhibitions to a program with a two-part mission. The first part is to change the narrative around incarceration and around those who are impacted by incarceration, specifically to rehumanize people. Really, that's what we're talking about, because popular media and what we see out produced in our, in major content is really dehumanizing in a lot of ways, and it doesn't provide justice and give context to people's actual lives and their trajectories into prison. That's the first part of the mission. The other part of the mission is to use the arts as a community enhancement tool. So that is using the arts for strategic arts engagement. So that is like professional development, capacity building. How can we use the arts in different meeting spaces to better situate conversations in a way where it's more engaging and we can get to some community solutions? So not just that art is the answer, but that art is a pathway or a tool we can use to get to the answer. So this is the work that I've been doing with the Confined Arts. Since I graduated from the university, I've brought the program over to Another Choice Youth and Family Outreach, which is located in East Harlem at Mount Zion AME Church. This is where I met Alex, where I met Jerome at. And we've been in East Harlem for the past 3 years. We were fortunate enough to get some money from Ford and from another foundation to just be able to continue to do professional development work. I think it's worth mentioning, I'm also the chairperson of the Human Services Committee for Manhattan Community Board 11. And a lot of the issues we deal with as the Human Services Committee is immigration, homelessness, and just like a lot of those just basic human service needs. But yeah, that's we're out there in East Harlem, and the work. It's interesting because I thought that everything would just be about the arts for me, until I really was just like in the places where the need got the strongest, and it was like, well, art ain't gonna put food in people's stomach. So how does the arts have a role even in these spaces? So we had to think outside of those boxes. How can the arts be used as a tool? Perhaps you can't eat your paintbrush, but perhaps you can sell some artwork and then be able to provide for yourself. There are a lot of folks who are coming home with a lot of skills that are not harnessed, they're not cultivated. And when you come home from prison, say you spent 20 years incarcerated and you were, one of the best artists in there selling paintings, making a living for yourself in there, if you will, and you come home and you're being pushed into jobs that are a completely different industry. Sure, you'll do the work, but there's no longevity in there. There's no career development in there. So how can the arts be more of a sustainable tool for people coming home? Also, how can we educate those organizers that are, working with people in an artistic capacity, like, for an example, folks like Jerome, who may go into a place and work with people who are directly impacted? How do we train people in trauma-informed practices? You know, folks, I know a lot of people who have good intentions and go in places with some bad projects, you know, and they go in with some bad curriculum, and they really believe that because, you know, they were able to fulfill their goals, that they left the space better, and they actually did more harm to people inside, not knowing, you know, how some of their, you know, programmatic sort of activities might have re-triggered some things with people, you know, how unresolved trauma, you know, a lot of times folks try to, you know, if we're in deep discussion and something tough comes up, we may, because we don't know how to deal with it, try to bypass it and move past it too quick. And that's traumatizing for people a lot. So when you go into these places as an artist or like an arts practitioner, especially those teaching in prisons, it's important that they understand the population of people that they're going to work with, especially since a lot of practitioners don't have justice. They're not impacted by the justice system. So our work has developed tremendously in this regard. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks a lot. Maybe I would immediately pick up on one of the things that you more or less all three mentioned, and that is also very central, I think, to what brings the different artists here together, which is what you, Melissa, call this collision between criminal justice and homelessness, and a struggle, a fight for decent housing, right? So I wonder if you could maybe elaborate a bit on how you perceive that collision specifically in New York and in your own work.
Happily, but the first thing I want to say, and this is, you know, not being fussy and that, but you know, we tend to refer to it as the criminal legal system, not the criminal justice system, and I think that that's an important distinction to make, and that's part of the reason that this collision exists. You know, obviously, this is ultimately about values and you know, how we allocate resources, who we think is important, who we want to include, who we feel it's important to exclude, so that, you know, some people have most things and other people have almost nothing. And these are, you know, major social questions. And one of the reasons that this is so exciting to me, this experience right now, the work that you do, and the work that Broadway Housing Communities has done. I mean, from almost the beginning of creating supportive housing, the organization realized they had an empty space, and they invited artists to come in and use the space, not people who had gallery representation or, you know, access to collectors or anything like that, but artists, you know, people who had voices and were making things and talking to each other and needed the opportunity to talk to more people. So bringing more people into the conversation, making it explicit and not just, you know, a secret that, you know, we all share, but we're not taking the time to bring more people into the conversation is really important. And I think that's what the arts can do. I know this is probably getting ahead of things. I do want to make the point, perhaps everyone here knows or is aware of this very wealthy philanthropist, Agnes Gunn, who is an art collector. And she sold a painting she owned by a famous artist, Roy Lichtenstein, and I think she sold it for $300 million. And she used that money to fund an organization called Art for Justice. And Art for Justice is doing good work. But the fact is that art is commodified at that level, that there is the, you know, inside the commodification of art world and the real artists who are making things and creating conversation and dialogue around real issues. That is one of the issues that the conversation we're having tonight ultimately has to confront. We're not going to solve it here, but I just want to call it out.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go back and listen to what you said again. so I hope it's recorded. And but it was a lot. It was deep. It was a lot to reflect on too. And but I'll probably add to that question. Yeah, I think it was like Nina Simone, and I'm like paraphrasing her statement about the role of the artist. Like she said, like the role of the artist is to reflect the times, and I've come up from the art, like hip hop is like what I come up from. I still love it, hip hop. And it was a statement that I heard recently about it was this artist who said that we have to engage hip hop or and utilize it and critique it, because if not, it's going to be utilized against us. And that's kind of like what I see today with a lot of the hip hop music. Although there's like, it was a time like when I was growing up, if you didn't have a conscious song on your album, you was going to get some serious critique about it. And the further we got further away from that, and the role of the artist today, I think should actually has some issues, like some really social justice issues to support. Agnes Gunn did her work. Um, if we look at in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of artists, contributed to some conscious music, even in the 80s to a certain degree, in the early 90s. But the hip hop community has gotten further away from that, and a lot of the conscious music has like moved to the mainstream. But it has a major role because they have a mainstream public wide platform that could reach millions of people. Whether it's music, whether it's through poetry, whether it's through photography or painting or dance. They have a wide audience, and I gave up on trying to get like artists into the movement work. Yeah, I guess I was jaded. I think that's the word. Yeah, I said let somebody else do that, but because it was a long struggle and a lot of disappointment. But artists definitely has a role because they can reach a lot of people. I think actually early on, like the campaign to close writers, I did do a panel with like John Legend at the New School. And he's very and he like knew a lot about bail, the issue around bail. Like he wasn't just like just a talking head, just to attract people because his mother was incarcerated, and he knew about that issue and he cared about it. And then like a couple of years later, somebody from his team reached out like, hey, what John was just thinking about, what's going on, what can he do? And he helped out again. So artists do play a role. They have a far reach, and I think that's something that I hope like the art community could like re-engage people into what's happening around the issue of mass incarceration in our country right now.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I would just add on to that the artist's role is to change the narrative, control the narrative. But I think one of the biggest things is that artists don't understand how much they already shape the narratives. Everything we see and we get information from is some form of art. We watch the news, those are video clips which are edited specifically at particular times. Certain words are cut off, certain aesthetics are shown, and that's an artistic choice, and in those ways, narratives are shaped. We learn about people, especially those we don't know, via some form of media, right? And that media it defines a narrative for us about a particular person, a particular community, a particular action or behavior that we may see. And so the power of artists to like change the narrative, I think is very, very important. One, that they acknowledge the power that they have, but also be more intentional. And that's a big thing for me, the intentionality around the arts and not just, I got to a certain point where, because I was at Columbia and I had to fight every day to explain why the arts needed to be in the middle of the psychology lab. You know what I mean? So I had to go through that a lot with folks. So it really, it helped me to become more practical and clear about the role that the arts can play in narrative structure, narrative building, and really storytelling is a powerful aspect of the arts. I think for the artists, I'm just thinking back about what you just said, Darren, about John Legend. I think artists at that level, they have influence, and because they have influence, they can more easily undo a bad narrative, or put forth a new narrative that people don't already have access to or know about, right? At other levels, just an artist painting, what the experience of going through the strip search was, brings everyone in the gallery space into their interpretation of what it was like to have to take their clothes off to be searched. So it gives you, it changes and shapes the narrative when it's intentional. So yeah, I think I'll just leave it there.
Then, yeah, I think you elaborated quite a bit already on the sort of role of art. I feel that there's sort of two intersections that are becoming very visible here. This that intersection on the one hand between legal justice and housing precarity, but also between art and activism. And so I wonder if to sort of, because we have to get towards the end of this part, but if you have reflections on that intersection also between art as activism or activism as art, or struggling with art within activism. So I would be very curious to hear from the three of you how you feel about that, especially in looking towards the future. So how do we move forward in that perspective? Anybody feels like...
I think another thing that I think this might have been a part of your last question I didn't touch on, but the connection between homelessness and incarceration, those are not too far apart. If you ever, I don't know if anyone has ever been in the DHS system, but it's not too off from being on Rikers Island. A lot of the processes are the same. The only thing really different that I've seen in my own experience is that you can get up and leave when you want. That's the only real difference, that you can get up and walk out the door and say, I don't want to stay here anymore. But of course, that comes at a great expense, right? Because now you have to go back through the cycle and end up back in the same place because they're not going to put you anywhere else. So just understanding like the cycle of incarceration, or the ecosystem of incarceration, and it's as if you're being punished for being homeless. And for men, this is a bigger, I don't want to say bigger, it's different because men don't receive the same types of support as women and children would going in. And if you're a man not attached to a family, then you're pretty much going through like the not in prison system, because that's essentially what DHS is. Bed locker, sharing showers. The whole living situation is exactly the same, so it's no real difference in it. To the question that you just asked about art and activism, the activism is bringing awareness to that right there. And the art is the tool by which we bring the awareness about this issue, and how we do that is with the arts. And in what fashions? Do we do it with the camera? Do we do it with our paintbrushes? Do we do it with our writing and our poems? Do we do it, with documentary? So that just to make the clearest connection, there needs to be, activism has to happen somehow. And the most effective forms of activism historically have been artistic engagement. One of the I wrote about this in one of my articles when I was writing for The Spectator, about the film Ava DuVaux's When They See Us, right? This was if you haven't watched it, please watch it. If you have watched it, I'm sure you probably won't ever watch it again. But it highlights the story of the Exonerated Five, also known as the Central Park Five. And the reason I bring this up is because around the same time the release of the documentary, there was an unfortunate murder of a young lady at Barnard College. And she was like 17, and the young people who got arrested were like 13, 14, 15. So it was really like we were just seeing something from before happening right now. And not to compare, those are two different situations, but Gail Brewer, who was the borough president at the time, did reach out to the NYPD to encourage them to ensure that their questioning tactics for the young people were humane and they were done legally, because that was one of the biggest issues about that that period and how they interrogated the young people and actually caused them to admit to a crime they didn't commit, under duress. So there was advocacy for the young people, and these are children, mind you. So I'm gonna put that in context. These are kids. Your brain ain't developed all the way right to you in your 20s. These are children, babies. I got kids. My oldest is like 22, right? And I got kids that age. These are kids. I see the silly stuff they do and how they just don't think about stuff sometimes. You know what I mean? So so it was, it's very unfortunate that there was a life taken, but fortunately more weren't taken because of a corrupt system and how they weren't able to deal with or properly handle the situation. So I think in those ways, we see the link between activism and art. How do I get this? How do I get people to understand this issue?
I mean, yes, yes, in all those areas. But there are many ways to express activism and to collaborate with. I mean, it takes all of us together to do it. So, someone who can lead a conversation and can join with an artist and can join with a writer and can join with with Gail Brewer, with elected officials, to bring the conversation to a level where more of us can leverage our voices and our power. Frankly, I mean, Eric Adams will come up for re-election next year. We all have to be activists, whether we are artists or understand ourselves as artists or not. I would say that there's probably more of us are artists than we realize we are. But the beauty of the kind of art, and this is why I made the point about the Roy Lichtenstein painting, of course it generated a huge amount of money that has been leveraged for good. But the kind of art that at Broadway Housing Communities, in the community galleries, that we share with each other, the Broadway Housing Communities created something called the Sugar Hill Children's Museum of Art and Storytelling, where storytelling was brought into that mix. Is very powerful. And that museum is, I mean, it's for everybody of every age, but it is really the target audience is young children, because that's when they are most open to learning from the arts, and their minds are, by being engaged with the arts, they learn everything. I mean, everything about themselves and the world around them. None of that has anything to do with money. None of that has anything to do with money. It's about, ideas and sharing ideas and imagining new things, imagining a world that doesn't look the way this world looks, and it doesn't have anything to do with money. So I just want to make that's important to me. And I think it's important to ultimately all of us, although money is powerful.
Yeah. So I think I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic about the future, the future of like art and activism, because I see it. I'm in those spaces sometimes. Just recently, I went to a screening of this film called Sing Sing. It was about a rehabilitation through the arts. Dynamic movie. That you go see it. Coleman Domingo, I think his name is. He's a really good dresser too. And so he plays this incarcerated person who starts his rehabilitation through the arts program, where people doing acting Shakespeare and things like that. And the movie is dynamic. So that's just dropped by A24, which is a big film company. And then is an artist named Jesse Crimes. He does these quilts. Talks a lot about solitary confinement. I think he just won an Oscar too for a documentary film that he was in. So it's out there. Artists who've been impacted by the criminal legal system, the stories, art and activism is collaborating a lot. So if you're in the art world, you can always reach out to those organizations. Like he's connected to a lot of artists. Yeah. So I'm optimistic about the future of art and activism.
thank you for. You want to?
No.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can hope some help. We can use some optimism and hope in the way that we try to approach the future when we talk about mass incarceration, homelessness, housing, and so forth. And maybe on that note of optimism, I would like to open up the floor, because I am aware that we have a lot of experience and expertise also in this room, in the audience. So we would be very, very curious to also hear reactions, comments, questions from either you with us in this room or online following the live stream on YouTube. You can ask your questions using the chat box, and then they will find their way to us. And maybe to open up that conversation with the audience, I would like to invite two artists that have been contributing to this show and who are very much also at the basis, actually, at the foundations of this exhibition. Felix Guzman, who's there in the back, and who was very important in dragging me into this by being very generous and introducing me to different people and organizations where he was working with. Felix has a selection of 7 of his poems exhibited here in this room, so we still have time also after this to read a bit into his work. And we have some of his chapbooks with more poetry at the bookshelf at the entry of the exhibition hall. And then Alex Anderson is also with us. Alex is the director of the Reentry Theater of Harlem. We have some photographs that we had to select from a huge pile of material of the fantastic work that the Reentry Theater does in Harlem, working with and by, operated and managed by formerly incarcerated people operating in mainly Harlem and the Bronx, and really using, mobilizing, deploying theater and performance art as an activist tool, but also as a transformative tool, staging a ritual for return, a rite of passage, wherewith participants stage and enact their own re-entry into society after the dehumanizing process that incarceration entails. So Felix, maybe I want to give the floor to you for a first reaction.
My connection to the criminal system is about the criminal pacifist, and therefore being in hyper-violent spaces and being neurodivergent and having to navigate that. So in that regard, poetry saved my life. You know, I had a pack of cards, and I kept to myself in my room, played solitaire, and just kept on at it. Regardless of whatever institutional setting, that's how I stayed alive, because I just had a different pathway to be here at this very moment. And so I wanted to actually spotlight a couple of things that people said around the arts as a tool for survival, but also as a tool for bridge building. And I really think that outside of the context of making money off of people in institutional settings, I think that we have a moral and social obligation to create a world that doesn't actually throw away people indefinitely. So with that being said, I really just commend the panelists on providing a framework for return to dignity, and also just understanding that there's a lot of stories out there that don't get brought to the forefront, and some of those stories are bits and pieces in this exhibit. And I just thank the arts. I thank the arts for bringing us all together and giving us an opportunity to understand the human potential and the collateral consequences of people being thrown away indefinitely. So it's more of a statement, not more of a question. But so this is a question posed to everyone. With that being said, how do you feel that the arts in the future can actually create that bridge to redemption?
Redemption is a big word. Um, I think there's a lot of ways I would like to see redemption played out on the big screen, because I think in a lot of ways folks don't understand that they are no better than the person sitting next to them, right? And that everyone needs redemption from something, in their lives. Uh, but I believe we can go harder, go stronger, and be more intentional with the arts, and not be passive with it. It really bothers me to. I think we're past the place where we just call artists in to just put art up on the wall because it pushes forward our work or our, some other larger agenda. It still happens, but I think we're past that. And I think when you call art into a space about justice, it needs to be a lot more intentionality around what we're talking about, how we're using the arts, why we're using the arts, what we hope to get out of this. Because after this whole event, we're talking about issues right now that people are up north dying for. There's people on death row dying. We got artists that are in prison right now. After this, we're about to drink and eat chips and all of that stuff. So, like, what are we really talking about, right? So, we got to be real about these gatherings when we have them. So I think just doing better as a culture of human beings for other human beings. I would love to see humanity expressed a lot more explicitly, because it's there a lot of just basic stuff that people go through that just doesn't make it to a bigger screen for other people to say, hey, I'm going through that same thing right now. You know what I mean? So I think we could just be more real, but that also just takes there not being this co-opting of media and the news. So we only got like 5 news networks national, right? Everything else is like, maybe you watch that news, maybe you don't, but like, if we only got 5 big broadcast networks controlling all of the news, we're not really in a good space when it comes to like really getting a clear sense of what people are going through day to day. So I think more access to real content around real issues and in places where the reporter is not willing to go. You know what I mean? So those are some things I would like to see.
Well, if I can deviate from that just a little bit, I wanted to refer back to something that Yaron said at the beginning in your opening remarks when you talked about homelessness being invisible, being shunted off to, warehouses in the Bronx. Actually, that's not true anymore. I mean, it was really not true in the 1970s when, psychiatric hospitals were emptied and people wound up on the street. That's what led Ellen to create supportive housing. And, people were emptied out of prisons and jails and on the street. And that's why she created supportive housing. But today, of course, we're all, again, as in the 70s, forced to confront the reality of this. And I think we need to be forced to confront it. And there are a lot of, we're getting to, it's getting too easy to look away because, we see it every day. But artists and activists who speak up and require us to take a look and take responsibility for what we're seeing is everything.
I think on one end, I just highlighted the activism side, but I think there's also the interpersonal experience that the artist has themselves, and I would love to see more art-based therapy practices. Where people can be given more options for rehabilitation and healing and things like that. So also the arts in the medical space is a lot more, is something I think in the future would be very beneficial.
Yes, good evening, and thank y'all so much for coming out. I just want to jump on. I had something else I want to talk about in terms of the artist being one of the candidates running for presidency in this country. I think it should be an artist. should take that position. But two things Philip said that really resonates very well with me. One, he said art saved his life. And the other one he said was art brings us together. And I think those are two things that we all are asking of, is bringing people together and saving people's lives. Art saved my life. I'm sure art saved a lot of people in their lives. If it wasn't for the arts, we would be probably somewhere else doing something else. Survival lives, trying to survive. I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in one, trying to advocate for the artists to take leadership in this country, get involved. So I think artists have the ability to see beyond what is present. I think one of the books that I read that was very impactful in my life was Wretched of the Earth by Frank Fanon. And he talked about how the conditions that we were creating for people was the real cause of mental illness. That he went around the world and studied people who were oppressed and colonized and all that, and he saw some of the same conditions and the impact it was having on people's lives wherever he went. And there was poverty and there were violence. He saw the same conditions. So he realized that it was the conditions that we were creating. And I think that an artist and the artist community can reverse that. With the vision and the power of art. So I would just like to get y'all comments about, one, having artists start to run for political office. I mean real artists. I ain't talking about somebody, saying they're artists, but people who we know are real artists. And two, the whole idea of art transforming our society, using art to transform our society. Darren?
I probably
No, I called on you, Darren, because you said something earlier about your feelings about art and how you.
Yeah. So this is like weird because like artists is a broad spectrum. It's like the painter, the photographer, the dancer, the actor, the musician. Like, so I was like trying to reach out to a lot of hip hop artists that have actually like been on Rikers Island. Like some of you probably know, like Remy Ma, Little Kim, Mano, Lil Wayne. So all these artists, I was reaching out for months and months and months, and like some of them, like I got a little bit close to a few of them, but when it came time to show up, it's like they didn't show up. So I was like, okay, I'm done. I'll let somebody else do it. But I hope people still try to engage, the art community in these social justice issues because it's important for a variety of reasons that was mentioned. They play a role, man, through civil rights movement. You had in the Black Power movement, Douglas Emery. The reason why people call it police pigs because of him, because of his art. Faith Ringgold. Some people heard of Faith Ringgold. Like she was like really, she kind of kicked the door open for all the other artists, black artists to come in. That Jacob Lawrence and all those others, Roman, Beard, yeah. She kicked the door in, and she didn't even get her flowers until just recently. People didn't really know about who she was. She was involved with like the protesting against the Attica massacre that happened. So the artist definitely has a critical role, like it was already mentioned about their influence, etc., that they have impacted the culture. So yeah, I think. But me, like on this little small issue around mass incarceration, like I don't really have the energy. But people doing like Felix is doing it. Me and Felix do advocacy together around housing and mental health and things like that. And he does it in his work, and you doing in your work. Isaac is doing it in his work. So it's there. My engagement, like trying to get more people into it. As this particular issue, I just got a little bit jaded, but I could probably get revived, and that's why I'm here today because I love art, and I support it. Basquiat is one of my favorite artists, and it's a lot. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I just want to say one really quick thing, and that is that Faith Ringgold is the one who told Ellen to create a children's museum of art and storytelling. So yeah, she kicked in a lot of doors, and she's still kicking.
One of the things that I started to think about, well, first, my brother, I would say anyone who calls themselves an artist is an artist. That's what I would say, right? Because you have to first self-identify. So many people who are really good at art and won't even say they are artists. But outside of that, I think when it comes to like artists in these high places, so when we at the college, just talk at the academic level. When you go to college, and I majored in visual arts at Columbia University, that's not, you don't see as many people going to graduate in an artistic field as you will see people going into a more common field where it's more likely that they would get a career and something that seems a little bit more foundational. You know what I mean? The arts is not as, you can't guarantee that you're gonna, be Basquiat after you finish college. You can't guarantee that you're gonna sell paintings. You can't guarantee that as an artist you're going to be able to make it. So the arts as a career path is not as secure, I would say, as other pathways. So I think, because I think it starts at like getting people to go to school, study the arts with a focus on social justice, a focus on sociology and things like that. But until we can really like, and it's horrible because everything we do in this country, we use some form of art to promote it, but still the arts is not seen as a, as you would a desirable field. You know what I mean? So I think at the academic level, there needs to be a more appreciation of arts, especially to people who may be studying other fields and like, well, what tool are you going to use to engage your population when you get in, right? Because a lot of folks have like an artistic background or love to do arts, and if you could show them how that skill that they had that time ago can be relevant in this work they're doing today, I think we would see the arts show up more in those spaces. You know what I mean? But I think it goes back to there being a value placed on the arts in relation to policy or in relation to law. So I'll be in a room at the university, and we got all of the legal people, the policy people, the lawyers, all the people who are the change agents in the room, and I'm like the only artist, and it's like they don't see the value in the arts as much as they see the value in having policymakers in the room and lawyers in the room. But when you have a policy or a law that you want people to buy into, and I'm going to say it that way because you can force a law or policy on people, but to get people to understand a policy and buy into it, that takes engagement with people. That takes the arts, So it's just consistent in how the arts is overlooked as the tool people need. But the first thing you say is get a branding kit, get a marketing kit. These are artistic tools that help us to do the jobs that we're doing. So I think to see the arts in those more high places in those ways, I think there needs to be more of a appreciation of it at the academic level and at the just in the nonprofit sector as well. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I feel like I'm just like adding to all these great things that you guys are saying, because you need an artist to help make the policy too. You need an artist to see that something could be different, and the policy, I mean, it's creativity, to imagine a different way, to see a way to a different path, and that's what we need. That's why we want the arts to be in education from the very beginning, so the kids' minds are more flexible and not so rigid and limited. So,
is there anybody else from the audience? Yes, please.
Well, I just wanted to say that, it was just recently that the budget, the city budget was up for approval, and the arts was going to be cut. And going through Culture at 3 and a lot of our not-for-profit organizations advocating for the arts, that actually there was a reversal of that. But it took a lot of effort.
Thanks to the city
so many
council.
organizations.
But let me just say, what we went to was like back to baseline. We didn't advance in any way. We went back to baseline. Yeah, it was going to go below that. But you know,
Oh, there you go.
I just want to make a comment. I want to say, piggyback on what you said about part of redemption. I don't know about redemption, but I'm telling you, these pictures and your poetry is powerful. And what it does for me, it puts it in perspective. That's what you guys have gone through. Because, let's be real, right? People don't think about it. You have feelings, solitary confinement, how is this shit? I don't think about it, right? What have these strip search? But look at these pictures, this is powerful. I mean, like, that poetry at the end, that really moved me. That last one, I was like, wow, I felt that. So don't, underestimate the power of art. And even though it's baby steps, it matters. Like, I'm, blown away by this. So just...
Yeah, thank you. I can add to that really quick. So like I have mentioned, my favorite artist is Jean-Michel Basquiat. And some of you probably familiar with his work, but he has a specific piece called Defacement. It's about Michael Stewart. Just if you're old enough, you probably remember Michael Stewart. He was, so for those who don't know the story, Michael Stewart was a young guy artist. He was, on a train. I think the story is that a policeman saw him kiss a white girl goodbye, went on the train, pulled him off the train, said he was writing graffiti, basically beat him to a pulp. He was in a coma. A lot of the artist community in New York City started mobilizing. He died basically and mobilizing to hold this police accountable. And Basquiat heard about it, went into Keith Haring's house and was like, that could have been me. That could have been me. And he took Keith Haring's his painting, his paint, and started drawing on his wall. And he drew this picture called Defacement. And so when Basquiat passed away, Keith Haring had cut it out and framed it over his bed. And then that painting was actually bequeathed to another artist's daughter, I believe. I forgot who it was, but there was a big exhibit at the Guggenheim. The first Black woman to ever curate the Guggenheim did it, and it was a powerful piece. But that paint is really powerful. And what you just said about how these paintings addresses issues and social justice issues, it happens throughout different types of art presentations.
So I just want to point out, folks, that Jerome's show was selected from over 500 exhibitions by about 650 people in 75 countries, showing you that there is an awareness of the situation outside of the US. But I also want to point out to the last couple of comments, there's a glass ceiling in the art world. You come here and you see these kinds of things, but you go to the commercial galleries in our neighborhood and you are not going to see these things. So it's it's the way art functions on one side of the glass ceiling versus the other side that doesn't make that transition.
I'm a social worker and I work in the public school with students in temporary housing. A lot of my students are showing up incarcerated. Their parents are incarcerated. I use writing, poetry, drawing, drum beating, storytelling, so they can express themselves. And as we talked about trauma, if we don't deal with trauma with the kids, we are not going anywhere. They cannot learn, they cannot focus, they cannot concentrate. So coming to my office and doing the arts is one way to help them release what they have all pent up, and then dealing with trauma informed.
Thank you for mentioning that, and thank you for your work, especially with our children, because that's a whole nother untapped community that's just largely impacted, from just not having parents present, seeing parents being arrested, hearing narratives from other family members about their parents. It's just so much for a young person to deal with and make sense of, and it doesn't make sense, so it's just Yeah, so thank you for your work and just giving them a space where they can flush through, all of that. That's a blessing. I was also thinking about, thank you for the comment about commercial galleries too, because when I came home, that's what prompted me to start the Confined Arts, because I wasn't getting into no galleries with my art. They wasn't about to let me in none. And that was what prompted me to, create a platform where we could start to show it was something for us by us. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
I had a question or thought about the connections that y'all were making between art and activism specifically. I think a lot of us living in the city, have seen a revival and explosion of grassroots activism, especially since 2020, the George Floyd protests, a lot of mutual aid around supporting migrants that are arriving in the city, Palestine solidarity. But I'm wondering if you all have kind of identified or seen sort of artistic movements emerging along with these more sort of activist or politically oriented movements, or perhaps, as was mentioned before, if you see that something that's being more stifled and underemphasized because of the way budgets and financial constraints are being put.
I mean, I would say the first artistic movement I saw was around the time when we started doing the work of the Confined Arts. And then around 2015, we did this exhibition at Columbia University. It was a national exhibition, changing the narrative. And then just through from like 2015, 16, 17, you just started to see so many organizations and pop-up galleries and a lot of projects like this that just brought more awareness to mass incarceration, more organizations being founded by justice impacted artists or for justice impacted artists. Organizations supporting youth, thinking about artistic noise, just a lot of that. I remember at that time a lot just happening. Since then, artistic movement, I haven't, I feel like what we're trying to do right now with Jerome and Alex, we are taking it to that next level, and I think that next level is really highlighting the intentionality of the arts as a community enhancement tool. So as a tool for advocacy, but also as a tool for cultural development, financial cultivation, and just these different ways the arts can be a tool, and be highlighted as more valuable in this work. So I don't know if that's a movement outside of the people I'm working with, but I'm working with a lot of people. So I feel like we can call it a movement because it is, that work I mentioned first has led to a lot of coalition building for those purposes. I'm also working with the Justice Arts Coalition. I'm the president of their board of directors. This organization is based out of DC and does a lot of coalition building nationally, but also works with artists all across the country in prison. So there is I want to say this work it is taking a different shape. And I feel like and the people that I'm working with are really pushing it in that way. Organizations like Recess, Phoenix Players Theaters Group, which is led by Bruce Levitt at Cornell. There's just so many people we're working in different sectors that are pushing forward this intentionality and advocating for more humane conditions for impacted people. So that is the movement I see. It's not as clear as that one is in hindsight, Yeah.
Yeah, kind of similar to what you said about not really like seeing the movement, but it's seeing a lot of work happening around from the arts community, especially like in issues around mass incarceration. Like I see like Molly Crabapple, she's an artist, and she people have like famous people, sometimes not famous, tell stories that she just paints the picture like it's in a movie. There's I think it's called Broadway Advocacy Coalition. They have a lot of artists who perform on Broadway, collaborate with social justice organizations that's doing work around various issues, and like actually Freedom Agenda was partnered up with them. I think it was last year, and like they had these two artists. I forgot her name. Oh, Tiffany Mann. She's a singer, actress. Some of you probably know Tyler Perry movies, the husband and wife, but their daughter basically had did a song for Freedom Agenda along with someone else. So yeah, it's happening. It's happening. It's definitely happening. I think it's growing, like you said.
Let's take that as a takeaway. I'm afraid that I hate to do this, but I have to cut at least this part of the conversation. But I do absolutely hope that the conversation nevertheless continues during the reception. And of course, I do absolutely hope and anticipate also that the conversation will continue on many other gatherings and events in numerous spaces in the city. On my end, I have to thank you, the three of you, very much, and all of you for coming out, sharing these insights. I'm very much on the learning end here, and I'm enjoying and appreciating that very much. I do also want to take a second to invite all of you for the other upcoming events. We have a performance tomorrow by Iman, who is the artist who is squatting this backdoor space here. We have another panel debate coming up Saturday with Felix. We have a performance and a workshop next week, Thursday, with Alex and the Reentry Theatre of Harlem. And we have a closing reception and a poetry reading by Felix next week, Saturday, the 27th. So please feel warmly invited to join one or some or all of these also upcoming events. And then to conclude this part, I am very happy and honored to give the word to the Consul General of Belgium in New York for some closing remarks. Philippe van den Bulke, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for setting this up, for associating us to this event, and I've been very impressed by everything that we heard tonight. I mean, obviously, this whole connection between mass incarceration and homelessness is an important one, not just in New York, but in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And in Belgium, it's also the issue of incarceration and reintegration and social justice is something that we are struggling with. And there are some developments that are interesting, like, for example, the concept of community houses, having non-violent offenders stay in sort of open houses where they can learn trades, learn arts, and go to work, rather than sitting in a closed prison. So maybe there are some ideas that we can discuss in a follow-up conversation. But very much impressed by your engagement, by your activism, and the link with the arts, and the link between art and activism obviously is a very, very inspiring one. I'm learning a lot today. I've been looking at the art here, which is very powerful, and I look forward to having some more conversations after this. So I'll keep it at that. It's a hot day today, so we did bring some cold drinks, including some cold Belgian beer for you to cool down. So thank you very much, and congratulations again.